3.2.3 Non-satiation. Non-satiation, as the expression goes, means more is always better than less. To put it formally, if a commodity bundle has at least as much of one good and more of the other, it should be preferred. Consider commodity bundle A in figure 1.1 with two straight lines running through it, creating four quadrants. Those in the northeast contain more of both X and Y than A, and by the non-satiation assumption, any bundle in this quadrant is preferred to A. Conversely, bundles in the southwest contain less X and Y than A, and are less preferred. The southeast and northwest quadrants contain more of one good but less of the other, making it difficult to determine preference rankings. 3.2.4 Convexity. Convexity is somewhat challenging to explain but is based on the idea that as a consumer consumes more of a particular good, the additional utility obtained decreases. Marginal utility, defined as the change in utility due to an increase in the consumption of a given good, follows this principle. Convexity asserts that marginal utility declines as consumption increases. 3.1 Definition of utility. Utility is the level of happiness or satisfaction associated with alternative choices. Two economic theories, ordinal and cardinal utility theory, describe how a person maximizes utility. In cardinal utility theory, utile is used as a unit of measure for utility, providing a numerical measure of consumer satisfaction. In contrast, ordinal utility theory focuses on consumer preferences without assigning numerical values. 3.2 Difference between total utility and marginal utility. Consumers buy goods because they derive satisfaction from them, measured as utility. Total utility is the satisfaction obtained from all units of a particular commodity consumed over time, while marginal utility is the additional utility derived from consuming one more unit. Marginal utility can also be described as the difference between total utility derived from two different levels of consumption. 3.3 Marginal utility, consumer equilibrium. This section explores how the concept of marginal utility can explain consumer choices. A utility-maximizing consumer selects a bundle of goods where the marginal utility per unit of spending is equal for all commodities, the equimarginal principle. This ensures that spending reallocates to maximize utility, considering the marginal utility received from each goods relative to its prices. 13.5 Understanding consumer equilibrium and demand. Consumer equilibrium is a pivotal concept for explaining why a consumer's demand curve slopes negatively. Let's delve into this concept by considering a consumer initially purchasing two goods, X and Y, and how they reach a state of equilibrium. When two critical conditions are met, where the marginal utility per unit of spending is equal for all goods, and the consumer allocates all their income, a state of consumer equilibrium is achieved. In this state, the consumer has no incentive to change their mix of goods and services unless there is a shift in their preferences, income, or relative prices. Now let's explore what happens when the price of good X rises. A closer examination reveals that, as the price of X increases, the marginal utility per unit spent on X decreases. To restore consumer equilibrium, the consumer will adjust their consumption by increasing their consumption of good Y and reducing their spending on good X. Now please be patient as you watch fundamental concepts that can greatly enhance your understanding of consumer behavior on substitution effect, income substitution effect, income effect, and normal goods. Right now, I know it can get a bit tricky, but hang in there and watch this video all the way through. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section below. Let's make sure you leave with a solid grasp of these essential economic ideas.
Normal and inferior good. I'm going to start with a normal good. Along the x-axis, I'm going to have quantity of good x. Along the y-axis, quantity of good y. And I'll draw in a budget line and an indifference curve. The consumer will consume at point A and consume 4 units of good x. Now I'm going to have a price decrease of good x, so the quantity of good x is going to go up. The budget line rotates outwards, so the consumer can actually buy more of good x, like that. I'm going to draw in a second indifference curve. So the consumer will move to point B and consume 17 units of good x at that point. And this distance there is the total effect. Total effect is 17 units minus 4 units for a total effect of 13 units. I should probably label these indifference curves 1 and 2. Now I'm going to break the total effect into 2 parts, the substitution effect and the income effect. And to do this, I'm going to take the new budget line after the price decrease and bring it back parallel until it's just tangent to the first indifference curve. And this line I pull back is parallel to the new budget line, so it's parallel. And I'm going to move down the indifference curve to the point where it's tangent right there, and I'm going to label that C. And at that point, the consumer consumes 10 units of X. So the substitution effect is 10 minus 4. And I'll label that S for the substitution effect. Now I will move the budget line back to its correct location, which is point B right there. Again, to do the substitution effect, I just move it back and forth parallel like that. And this distance right there is the income effect. And that's 17 minus 10. And I will label that I. The total effect is going to be that distance, and it's going to be the substitution effect plus the income effect is the total effect, which is 17 minus 4. And this is equal to 13. I could also take 6 plus 7, which is 13. Now I will show you the income and substitution effects for an inferior good. For an inferior good, if income goes up, quantity consumed goes down. Again, overall, the price of X goes down, but the quantity consumed of X goes up. Let me show you that now. So the budget line rotates out like it did before. I draw in a second indifference curve, looks like that. And at point B, the consumer is going to consume 7. So the total effect is 7 minus 4. I will label that T. For the substitution effect, I will take that budget line, the new budget line, and I'll make another line. I'll drag it back parallel until it's tangent with the first indifference curve. I will move from point A to point C, and at this level, the consumer is going to consume 10 units of good X. So 10 minus 4 is the substitution effect. And I will label that S. I will put the budget line back where it belongs. The income effect is actually going the other way, and it's 7 minus 10, or negative 3. And I'll label that I, the income effect. The total effect is 7 minus 4, or plus 3. The price of X goes down. The quantity of X consumed by the substitution effect increases. And the quantity of X due to the income effect actually decreases. The total effect is going to be 6 plus a negative 3, or plus 3. I'm going to show you the income and substitution effects for a normal good with a price increase. The consumer starts at point A and will consume a quantity of X of 14 units. The price of X goes up, so the consumer will consume less of quantity of X. So what you're going to see is that the budget line is going to rotate inward and the consumer will be able to buy less. I will draw in another indifference curve, and the consumer will consume at point B and consume 4 units of quantity of good X. So the total effect is that distance there. I'll label that T. Like before, I'm going to take the total effect and show you the substitution effect and the income effect. So the substitution effect, I do the same thing. I take the new budget line and move it out parallel to the new line. So it's parallel until it's just tangent to the first indifference curve. I move along the first indifference curve to that point right there, and I'll label that point C. And the consumer now consumes 7 units of good X. And that is going to be labeled S for substitution effect. I will move the budget line back right there. The remaining distance, I'll label I for the income effect. So as the price of X goes up, the quantity of X consumed goes down. The substitution effect is that distance, which is 7 minus 14. Seven minus 14 is equal to negative 7. The income effect is the remaining distance, and that's going to be 4 minus 7. And this will be equal to negative 3. The total effect is going to be 4 minus 14. And this is going to be equal to negative 10. Negative 7 plus a negative 3 is negative 10. And now let me show you the same for an inferior good. Like before, the price of X goes up, and the quantity of good X will go down. The budget line rotates inward like this. The consumer will buy less. Let me draw in another indifference curve, a second indifference curve. And the consumer will now consume at point B, which is going to be 8 units of X. So the total effect is going to be that distance there, and I'll label that T. And I'll break that into substitution and income effects. So the total effect becomes 8 minus 14, or negative 6. For the substitution effect, I take the new budget line and just slide it back until it's just tangent with the first indifference curve. So I move from point A to point C along the indifference curve, and now the consumer consumes 7 units, and I'll label that S. The substitution effect is 7 minus 14, which is equal to negative 7. The income effect is going to be the remaining distance, or that little distance right there. I'll highlight in yellow. Remember, as income goes down, the quantity consumed of an inferior good goes up. I'll label that I. And the income effect is 8 minus 7. Or positive 1. The substitution effect is negative 7. I add these two together, and this gives me a total effect of negative 6, or negative 7 plus 1 is negative 6. So in this tutorial, I showed you income and substitution effects for normal and inferior goods with a price increase and a price decrease.
Welcome back, dear viewers. I genuinely hope that you found our exploration of the substitution effect, income substitution effect, income effect, and normal goods informative and enlightening. If you'd like to revisit any part of the video or have any questions, please feel free to reach out on WhatsApp by adding your questions there. Now, let's transition back to our ECO 231 textbook, incorporating the insights gained from our video discussion. Substitution effect. When good X becomes relatively more expensive, the quantity of good X demanded decreases due to this substitution effect. In addition to the substitution effect, there is also an income effect when the price of a good changes. In this case, since good X has become more expensive, the consumer can no longer afford the original mix of goods X and Y. This income effect results in a reduction in the quantity demanded for all normal goods. If good X is a normal good, both the substitution and income effects work together to decrease the quantity of good X demanded. It's important to note that there's a possibility for an inferior good to have an upward sloping demand curve if the income effect outweighs the substitution effect in magnitude. Such a good is referred to as a Giffen good, named after an economist who initially suggested that during the Irish potato famine, the quantity of potatoes demanded increased as their price rose. However, later analysis indicated flaws in Giffen's evidence, and reliable evidence of Giffen goods is rare. As a result, it is generally safe to assume that demand curves are downward sloping.